All right, so we're still learning Pirkei Avos, Ethics of Our Fathers. Many communities have the custom to study Ethics of Our Fathers in the weeks between Pesach and Shavuos. That's the universal custom. The Shabbat, every week, another chapter of the 6 chapters during the 6 weeks between Pesach and Shavuos. Many communities, and Chabad included, we continue to study Pirkei Avos through the summer. So last Shabbos, we will have learned chapter 1, and this coming Shabbos, we'll learn chapter 2. So here we're looking at a Mishnah from chapter 1, chapter 1, Mishnah 17. The first chapter, if you look carefully, is also a timeline of Jewish scholarship, if you will. Right, the opening Mishnah begins with Moses received the Torah at Sinai, passed it to Joshua, gave it to the elders, who gave it to the prophets, who gave it to the men of the Great Assembly. And then it says, they said, giving a teaching from the men of the Great Assembly. And then it says, Shimon HaTzadik, Shimon the righteous, was the last of the men of the Great Assembly, and he said, and in the Mishnah, the next Mishnah we'll read, and this person received the Torah from Shimon HaTzadik, and he said, and then each Mishnah begins with the one who received from the one speaking in the Mishnah before, and then that person speaks. So in that context, the Mishnah reads, Shimon, his son, said, his father being Gamliel. Gamliel is on the line of the Hillelean line, actually. Begins with Hillel the elder, Hillel HaZaken, the famous Hillel, and him, his son, grandson, great-grandson, great-great-grandson, I'm not sure how many greats, but it goes down a number of generations, all the way, including into Babylonia, where father, son, serve as the head of the Sanhedrin, the head of the Jewish court system, the head of the Jewish even political system, depending on what was going on at the time. And Shimon is on this. So it's Hillel, Gamliel, Shimon, Rabbi Huda Hanasi, and then again Gamliel, Shimon, it's going down. So this is Shimon Benois. Shimon, the son of Gamliel, says, all my days I grew up amongst the sages, right? His father's Gamliel. His father's the head of the Sanhedrin, head of the Jewish academy, head of the Jewish court. So he grows up in that milieu and says, all my days I grew up amongst the sages. It's on page, oh, whoops, I didn't get the paper, sorry. Here, it's on page 1. Sorry. Levi. Yeah, I'm sorry, yeah. Tomorrow. Yeah. Yeah. Maybe it's the 14th. Maybe you're right then. I think I seem to remember tomorrow we resume. I seem to remember tomorrow. Anyway, so resuming saying Tachanan. Oh. Okay. So Shimon says, all my days I grew up amongst the sages and did not find anything better for one's person than silence. Statement 1. So he's observing all these sages, all these great men, and says the character that works best for these people, the guys who are quiet, talk less. Statement 1. Statement 2, not study, but practice is the essential thing. So that's statement 2. Statement 1 is nothing better than silence for one's person. Number 2, the main thing here is action, not study. And number 3, whoever engages in excessive talk brings on sin. So we're going to unpack mostly the first 3 statements, but the third will follow suit. Okay, so I apologize. The rest of the commentary is all in Hebrew. So I'm going to kind of, maybe I highlight some words, but mostly just share with you what it says. And you're welcome to have a look at the Hebrew text on your own and see what more you can take out. So the first comes from Rambam's commentary to the Mishnah. If I'm not mistaken, Rambam's commentary to the Mishnah is the first book he wrote. And he wrote it in Arabic, actually, because that was the common language of the Jews in his region at the time. That is to say Spain, and then exiled from Spain through North Africa and to Egypt. And if I'm not mistaken, he wrote this entire commentary on the Mishnah while he was on the run from the Muslims who threw them out of Spain into North Africa. And this is all while he's becoming a doctor also, just by the by, and writing books on medicine too, just in case that wasn't enough. Yeah, he's a young man and he's doing all this. Is incredible. Anyway, so it's written in Arabic, and his objective in writing the Mishnah was the language of the Mishnah is rather simple. So it's very straightforward. It's written like short, small statements, not very complex for the most part. The Gemara, however, the Talmud that follows the Mishnah is much more complicated, and therefore much more difficult for the layman or the uninitiated to be able to just learn and read. So his idea was to write a commentary to the Mishnah that would give it basically synthesize and simplify all the complex discussion of the Talmud. So if you're ever learning Mishnah on your own and want to get a little bit more background and fill in the gaps, Rambam's an easy go-to. If it's available in English, I'm not sure. At any rate, his commentary on ethics of our fathers is actually it's part of the grand commentary, but it's a standalone like book on its own, because the tractate Avot, Pirkei Avos, doesn't have any Talmud. So he's not synthesizing any Talmud here. He's just commentating just as a commentator. And specifically, because ethics of our fathers is all about ethics and morals, in this commentary to ethics of our fathers, Rambam lays out his version of ethical living. So a lot of his moral philosophy is found in this commentary to Mishnah. He has even an 8-chapter introduction to ethics of our fathers, in which he lays out his philosophy for living a good moral life, and then that undergirds his commentary to the Mishnah. Anyway, so it's a freestanding, beautiful work. I'm not sure if it's available in English online. I'm sure somewhere it is, because it really is just a very easy, light read. It's not very heavy and very practical.
If it's 8 chapters, it's an intro.
Yeah. Actually, the 8 chapters, the last 2 are heavy because it gets philosophical, but about free choice and free will. But most of it is actually very like practical, pragmatic sort of how to build moral character and how to. Yeah. Right at the intro, he describes his like what his main thesis for building moral character is, and then he comments on the Mishnah using that basic idea that he presents in the 8th chapter introduction.
Commentary to the Mishnah is only 8 chapters.
No. His introduction to his commentary to the tractate Avot is 8 chapters. It's a freestanding work. Yeah, so
you think you can get it in English?
The 8-chapter introduction is definitely available in English. If you search, it's actually just called 8. It's called 8 chapters. If you search up 8 chapters by the Rambam, Shmona Prakim La Rambam in English, 8 chapters of the Rambam, it'll come up as a freestanding work. But that freestanding work is really an intro to his commentary to tractate Avot, which is itself a freestanding work. It's probably available there, yeah. I'm sure it's available in English there, yeah. Yeah. And that's, so it's like 8-chapter introduction is like a freestanding work to his commentary to Avot, which is a freestanding work, both of which are part of his larger commentary to the Mishnah. Right? Anyway, okay, just a little background for fun. So Rambam essentially says, explaining this line, he says like this: you have different classes of what you would talk about, different things you would talk about. If what you're talking about is something negative, he calls it for that which is forbidden and that which is nimas, that which is like nimas is like repulsive.
How do you say that?
Nimas, like nimasli, you say in Hebrew. I've become like repulsed. So he says, if what you're talking about, it's originally written in Arabic. This is translation to Hebrew, so it's Arabic to Hebrew now to English by me. So I don't know what the original is. So I don't speak Arabic. I don't know the word in Arabic. I'm saying the Hebrew word is nimas, but that word is translated from Arabic in the original. Anyway, it doesn't matter. The point is, he says, if what you're talking about is forbidden and repulsive in nature, then you shouldn't be speaking about it at all. Don't say it. It's forbidden and it's disgusting. Don't say it. If what you're talking about is loving and is mitzvah, then say lots of it. If you can spend your entire days talking about loving things and mitzvah things, fantastic. Talk about all those things. So what does a Mishnah mean when it says, I haven't found anything better than, and nothing better for a person than silence? Well, not the category of the forbidden, because that's just forbidden. It wouldn't even be mentioned here as something that's the best for you. If it's loving and mitzvah stuff, talk about it all day long, right? Your whole life, wish you could talk about that. What he's speaking here is of just human needs that are not forbidden nor encouraged. A person's talking about food, talking about his clothing, talking about his business. So whatever I need to talk about, I'll talk about. But if I don't need, don't. And that's what the Mishnah means here when it says the best thing for a person is to be quiet, meaning That which you should be talking about, talk about it all day long. That which you shouldn't be talking about, don't talk about it at all. But those things that are in the middle, say what you need, and that's it. Right? Which is a nice. This is like a classic commentary from Rambam on the Mishnah in this in chapter of it. It's a very practical sort of like human understanding. So that's very nice. That's Maimonides, Rambam's commentary to this Mishnah. Next, we have, in a similar kind of vein, we fast forward a number of centuries, and we come to Vilna, to the famous Vilna Gaon, known as the Gra, HaGaon Rabbi Eliyahu, the genius Rabbi Eliyahu of Vilna. So in his commentary, Rambam is born in 1140, somewhere there, 1130 something, and the Gra is living in the late 1700s. So we're fast forwarding a couple of centuries, but he says a very similar thing as follows. The language of the Mishnah is, the way we read it in English is, I haven't found anything better for a person, for one's person. The translation, one's person, from Hebrew is guf. L'matzatzi l'guf tov mishtika. I haven't found something for the person, l'guf, but the person is referred to as guf, which means literally body. And therefore says the Vilna Gaon. When it comes to matters of guf, the body, that's where Rabbi Shimon says, talk less, or better don't talk at all. But when it comes to Torah study, one should be talking. It's a mitzvah actually to talk when one learns. When one learns, right? There are different mitzvahs with regard to learning Torah. There's the mitzvah to know Torah. It's a mitzvah to know. That's a cognitive mitzvah to know. And then there's a mitzvah Talmud Torah, the study of Torah. The optimal manner of studying Torah is actually to verbalize it. It's the halacha. The Alter Rebbe rules in his book on the laws of Torah study that if one can verbalize the study of Torah and doesn't, he hasn't fulfilled his obligation of study. Maybe he'll fulfill his obligation of knowing Torah because he's got new information, but he hasn't fulfilled his obligation for study. He should verbalize it, unless the verbalization ruins his concentration. But otherwise, one should verbalize their study. And therefore says the Vilna Gaon, when the Mishnah here says silence, it's referring to guf, to things for the body. There is best silence. When it comes to Torah, it should be verbalized. And nonetheless, even though you're just told to verbalize your Torah study, don't think learning is the main thing, but rather action. And that's the flow of the Mishnah. Keep quiet on matters of body, which means, therefore, talk in Torah. But even in your Torah study, talking is not the main thing. The main thing is to act. That was the Vilna Gaon. On page 2, the Midrash David, he says like this. In this statement, which says, Allah medrash ikar ela maisa, study is not the main thing, but rather action is the main thing. So he explains as follows, something we intuitively all know, but he verbalizes it, saying, look, one who doesn't study and therefore, or is incapable of studying, didn't get an education, whatever the reasons are, and this person doesn't act in 100% accord with Torah expectation, then, how much can you hold this person accountable? Doesn't know. Hasn't got an education. Doesn't know where to get the information from. But one who's midrash, one who's learning and doesn't act, that's not good. It means this person knows what's right and what's wrong, and what could be done and what should be done, and doesn't. So the Mishnah here, which says, the study is not the main thing, but rather the action, is referring to the fact that if you are a person who studies, you better act up and live up to that. Because if you don't, that's a real failure. When you can learn and not implementing what you learned. Yeah.
Well, in the morning, when we say in the morning, the Mishnah say in the morning there, it gives a list of the things we're supposed to do in practice, but then it says, but learning Torah is equivalent to it all.
Yep.
Them all. Does that contradict?
Why?
Well, because learning Torah is equivalent.
Oh, it's equivalent to them all. So that contradicts this idea that learning is not the main thing, but action. Okay, so maybe, yeah, that's a good question. In other words, if the Mishnah tells us that study of Torah is equal to all the mitzvahs, then maybe that should be the main thing. So maybe this would be kind of response to that. It's true, learning is the main thing, but if you're learning, you better behave according to what you're learning.
Yeah.
Right? So that would follow.
To know what to do.
Yeah. Maybe some of that will become more clear as we go along. Yeah. So that was the Midrash David. Now we have the Maharal, which is taking a bunch of different angles here. Maharal writes like this. The Mishnah just told us the best thing for a person is silence. Why? Because this is how he understands it. Because we're supposed to be people of the mind. You know, like when you're at a conference table and everybody's talking, the smart people don't talk right away. Listen to what everybody says, absorb, think about it, process it, and then you have 1, 2 lines that get right to the chase because you've taken the time to listen and to observe, to absorb. So when the Mishnah says, silence, it's and if we're not talking, what should we be doing? We should be thinking. So having told you to keep quiet and think better than talk, you might then think, well, the main thing is to be people of thinking. And therefore the Mishnah goes and says, well, don't get stuck there. You've got to make sure you implement it also. Not the study, but the action is the main thing. Right? And as he explains, because a person has a mind and a person has, where is it? Right. A person has a mind and a person has a body. And for the mind, silence is best. But not just the mind is meant to serve God. The body is also meant to serve God. And therefore there's action as well. So that's how he understands the flow of the Mishnah. It's best to keep quiet and think. But don't only think, make sure you also act. And that's the next statement in the Mishnah. Best to keep quiet, and then followed by, learning is not the main thing, but the action is the main thing. So if so, at this point you would say, action and thinking are equal. Why is action the main thing? So to that he responds by saying, a person's intellectual and thinking pursuit can only be truly successful if it's founded on a strong foundation of action. You can kind of say it like a theory is only as good as its test. Right? So we're much smarter when we act out our ideas and see how they get implemented. So of the two, so be quiet, think better. But you also have to act because you have a body, and the body also has to serve Hashem. But of these two, acting will support your thinking, not the reverse. Which sounds counterintuitive, but it's true that acting out and living the way we are supposed to actually increases our thinking and increases our understanding. That is Maharal's comment.
If you incorporate it into who you are, it's not doesn't just become like a theory or something you learn about.
It doesn't stay in the abstract; it becomes real.
Okay.
Can you give us an example of how acting out enhances your
thinking?
Yes.
So I gave a physical example, which is like if you have a theory, you have to like act it out in the lab to see if it actually works.
I see.
And then when you act out in the lab, you become smarter because now you have more data to work with, right? So you become smarter based on your action. But I think more to the point here that a person's study of Torah itself is built and is strengthened by their performance of mitzvahs. We all know this also intuitively. When you've done a mitzvah, your mind is much more clear than not so. Right? You're not so sure. That's how I feel, at least. If I start my day off right and I got my davening and I got my thing and everything's on time, then my brain is working open and clear. But if I don't do my things that I have to get done, my brain is a little foggy. It's hard to think. Right? Even like on a very psychological level. You start your day with your routine, the brain's clear. But the routine doesn't necessarily include thinking. It's actually could be very menial tasks. Right? And especially as a Jew, part of your routine is you have your negava, you have your Netzilat Yadayim and your brachas, and if you got your whole thing in order, now your brain is thinking clearly. At least that's my experience. And that's perhaps what he means here. Okay, so that's Maharal. So we're building a number of comments here. We have Rambam, who talks about if it's forbidden talk, don't say it at all. If it's loving talk, say plenty. When it's things that are just my needs, food, clothing, business, minimize. Gra, who says, that's the point. Bodily talk, don't do. Torah talk as much as you possibly can. Midrash Toiv, who says, well, if you're learning and not implementing in action, what kind of learning is that? You're held much more accountable than the one who doesn't learn. And then now we have Maral, who says, keep quiet, think better, but don't get stuck in thinking, you got to act. And in fact, your act is the primary because it'll support your thinking. This is Maral. Now we get to, so you want to say something?
I said, if you don't have anything else to say, don't say it.
Yes, that's what my mother told me growing up.
Mhm.
If nothing nice to say, don't say it. Yep, pretty much. Sorry?
No.
And then we have interesting comment from the Kol Cipher. I'm not sure who that is, who writes as follows. If you want to teach, the best way to teach is by living an example, acting. Not so the language here is laha midrash ikr. Midrash could translate as study, but midrash could also translate as like preach. So laha midrash ikr, preaching is not the main thing. Ela maisa, but your actions. If you're a teacher and you want to leave an impression on your students, acting the way you want them to act is much better. Demonstrating it is much better than talking about the theory of it. It's much more powerful. When you see someone behave a certain way, than when you hear about it or read about it or anything like that. So leah medrash ikr, not the preaching is the main thing, but hamaisa, acting it out, being a living example. That's the best way to implement. Right? We know this as parents. We know this intuitively. Tell our kids from today to tomorrow, and nothing really happens. When they see you day in day out living a certain way, they live along with it. Yep. I had this. I got this advice from someone who's somewhat of a mentor to me about trying to encourage my children to daven. And so he was asking about what my interactions are like with my children when I'm davening in shul. He's like, you're telling them to daven too much. It's like, you just daven. Just sit down and say every word slowly and out loud and enjoy it. And your kids will follow. Took a little while and he was right. He was very right. If you behave the way you want them to behave and live the way you want them to live, they'll follow. Talk, doesn't do anything.
We have to wait for that.
I don't know.
Very long time.
Whenever I say these things, I have to say, look, you have to be careful because my oldest child is 12. So you have to come back to me when he's 18. I'll tell you if it worked.
Yeah.
I don't know. Right now he's 12, the oldest.
You find out much later.
Sorry?
Find out much later, Rabbi.
Yeah,
I'm
apparently.
looking at my daughter now, like she's doing some of the stuff I used to do. And I'm like,
That's right. That's right. They behave the way we behave, not the way we talk. Anyway, okay, so the next comment we have is from Rabbi Yaakov Emden, the Yavitz. Yaakov Emden, we had occasion to talk about him. I don't know if we did at this table, but in our series Meet the Giants that we did last summer, we spoke about Rabbi Yaakov Emden, lived in Altona, Hamburg, Germany in the 1600s. Prolific writer, author, self-publisher, because he had a printing press in his house, an extremely controversial figure. He had a printing press in his house.
oh,
And an extremely controversial figure who would pick Torah fights with many people and left his indelible, that's the right word, indelible mark on Jewish literature. Anyway, so this is his comment on this Mishnah. He says like this. You have human rationality, and then you have godly rationality. And sometimes godly rationality thinks very differently than human rationality. And he gives here two examples. Number one is when it comes to divine providence. Human rationality says the greater you are, the less interested you are in small things. So if God is so grand, what's he wasting his time looking at me for? That's human rationality. But godly rationality says God is so beyond anything, then what's the difference? He can sit with whoever he wants. If I'm a small little person, I want to hang out with people who are bigger than me because it makes me feel bigger. God spends times with bigger people, he feels bigger. Godly rationality says he's so beyond anything that what's the difference? He decides who he wants to hang out with, and he decides he wants to watch me. This is the first thing he says about the difference between human rationality versus godly rationality. And then the other, related to this Mishnah, is with respect to action. Human rationality says the best thing is rationality. The more we think, the more we philosophize, the more transcendent we become. And godly rationality says, well, what's your purpose in life? Angels don't have bodies, they can think all day long. Humans have bodies, you need to act. So human rationality says, transcend this bodily stuff. And godly rationality says, well, serve God with your body. And therefore, lo yamedrash ikar, not the study is the main thing. Angels do it better than we do. Allah Maisa, the body, the action is the main thing. This is a godly rationality, not a human rationality. It's a nice way of putting it. And furthermore, he says, Jewish faith, the godly rationality, finds faith not in philosophy as much as it does in the performance of mitzvahs. Kind of the same thing, right? Where human rationality says transcend by thinking and philosophizing, and then maybe hopefully you'll get to some transcendent understanding of the divine. Whereas godly rationality says you want to get real faith and connection to Hashem, do a mitzvah, act. So leah medrash, not the study is the main thing, because that's not going to get you closer to God. That's the way human thinks they'll get closer to God. The godly way to get closer to God is hamaisa, the action, performance of mitzvahs. God gave us a body, we do mitzvahs with the body he gave us. And that's what he explains. Indeed, our mind connects to Hashem. That's true. But the true godly way to connect to Hashem is in action. And he gives the example of a doctor. You have one kind of doctor who's in the lab theorizing about how medicines work. And that heals nobody unless the patient takes the pill. The action is what ends up getting it done. So maybe from the human perspective, the person wants to transcend and live in the lab where he goes higher and higher in philosophical thinkings. That's not really going to connect him in real time. What's going to give him that real faith, the real connection to Hashem, is going to be Maisa, is going to be in the action, the performance of the mitzvah, like taking the actual pill rather than theorizing about how the pill works. Very sharp comment from Rabbi Yaakov Emden. And finally, sorry?
Especially given what's gone on for the past 3 years here
Explain.
around the world.
What are you referring to?
Vaccine, there's a lot of theory, right? Some action, some theory. Theory's good.
Well, they have to do a trial.
Yeah, that's what trials are for, right? Back to what we were talking about before. You get smarter when you try something. Okay, finally, the Rebbe's comment. Now, if you learned Chassidus and if you're sitting at the table, you know this, that Chassidus and the Rebbe keeps on telling us again and again and again that the ultimate purpose of creation is not heaven, but to bring heaven on earth. And therefore, it would follow very clearly for the Rebbe's thinking, for Chassidus thinking, that learning is not the main thing, but the action. Right? Because if the point is to bring godliness into the physical world, then we have to do physical action to bring God's purpose into this physical world. And moreover, the phrasing is, it doesn't just say, Hamaisu Eker, action is the main thing, which there is such a statement like that. Hamaisu Eker, action is the main thing. But it's prefaced by saying, Lo yamedrash Eker, not the study is most important, El Hamaisa, but the action. As if to imply, you have studied Torah study, you need that, but it isn't the main thing, it's the action that's the main thing. Meaning that the learning itself must be for the sake of action. Let's explain. The Talmud says elsewhere. Talmud has a famous dispute elsewhere. Which is greater, Talmud or Maisa, study or action? Which one's greater? And there's a dispute in the Talmud. One opinion says study is greater, and the other one says performance of mitzvahs are greater. And then the Talmud goes back and forth, till finally it says Nimnu v'gamru. They discussed it and they came to the conclusion. Torah study is greater. Why is Torah study greater? Because it brings action. So even in the conclusion that Torah study is greater, it's only because that Torah study is capable of infusing action. So it's ironic because the Gemara's conclusion is not really conclusive because they're having this dispute as to whether study is greater or action is greater. And the Gemara's conclusion is, well, study is greater, but only because it brings to action, which is what you were arguing for to begin with. Right? Almost as if to say, the virtue of Torah study itself is only if it serves to enliven that action. And therefore, the phrasing of the Mishnah here is not a blanket statement, action is greater, but rather Torah study is not the main thing, but action is the main thing. As if to say, you have Torah study and you need that. But that whole Torah study is because you need to bring godliness into this physical world. Right? And the Rebbe puts this in 3 different ways. Number 1, implementing in action will tell you if your Torah study was worthwhile. Like we saw before, a person who studies Torah doesn't implement what he's learning. What kind of learning is that? So that's number 1. Action will be like the litmus test if the study was actually a proper study, is if it can get implemented and implemented following the code of Jewish laws it's supposed to be. Number 1. Number 2, as we saw before, as we also said before, action increases my Torah study. It increases my greater, right? It increases my understanding of Torah. The effort that I exert in learning, that action brings more learning, deeper understanding. And number 3 is if in my action, it's not a dry action, but rather the action is enlivened, imbued, and invigorated by the appreciation that I've built from my learning. So that way my learning and my action are not in 2 worlds, where I have learning here, action here, and the Mishnah is telling me, oh, action is greater. No. It's you have learning, and all that learning should be invested into your act. And that when you do the mitzvah, you're doing it with all the excitement that comes along because of everything you've learned. Right? And now the learning itself became part of the process of bringing God's light into this world. It's not just the action that I'm supposed to do a mitzvah, I'm supposed to be godliness into the Torah, so I'm going to do the mitzvah and that's it. I don't understand it, I don't appreciate it, I find it annoying. Okay, you did it, that's great. But so much greater would be if you had the midrash, you had the learning, but remembering in that learning that the main thing is action, taking all the excitement that you've achieved and all the excitement that you build and the passion and enthusiasm and the care that comes from the learning, all that should be into the action. And that way we make a home for Hashem in this world, but not a dry home. Right? Doing the mitzvahs in action without putting any feeling into it that comes along with the learning is like building a brick home that has all the functions of a home, but it's missing the decoration, the art, the personal choice of what color paint I like and what color paint I don't like. There's no care. It's functional. I'm doing what I have to. It's a home, technically speaking, but is it really a home? It's lacking all that life. So there could be a person like midrash. The ma'aseh is ikar. The action is the main thing. Do the mitzvahs, but it comes from the midrash. It comes from the learning. So loya midrash ikar. You have all that study, but it doesn't stay there. All that learning becomes invaluable when it serves to invigorate the performance of my mitzvahs, turning the home I make for Hashem not just a dry home made out of dry action, but an exciting one, an exciting home, a warm home, a welcoming home, and a loving home, because I put all that love and welcome, all that feeling and love into the action of mitzvahs. So there is a number of layers in this one beautiful Mishnah about being silent when we're supposed to be and making sure that we're focusing on getting what we have to get done and not getting stuck in a world of theory. And even moreover, taking all that theory and using it as fuel to build our beautiful actions and mitzvahs we do in this world. Thank you all for giving me this opportunity this morning and have a wonderful day. Thank you.